video should be live. What's happening, everybody? What's happening? I'm just not getting live. For those who are watching the playback, skip to a couple minutes. I like to give it a second for people to start to jump in. Uh, and in this time, or you can watch, I might just kind of give a little preview about what we're going over here today. My bad. Gotta let the train show. I'm just playing. But we are here today to talk about slave narratives. Now, as I get people coming in the room, we should be, let me just double check, should be on YouTube going and going on Twitter. I'm gonna give this person a message back. But let me just check my Twitter here. Twitter page live. Twitter page is live. All right, let me just check the YouTube. Make sure the audio is super straight. And then we're gonna kind of jump into this. Slave narratives. Now, we're going to talk about a particular slave narrative. I didn't ask you for that. We're going to talk about a particular slave narrative. This slave narrative deals with somebody personally in my genealogical line. So it's pretty rare. It's a pretty rare thing to have a. I'm like, where? Switch account should be right here. Oh, there it goes. It's a pretty rare thing to have somebody a part of your genealogical line to be part of the slave narratives. Why do I say that? Because not everybody was interviewed by the state. Not a lot. Okay, yeah, I am. I'm live. It's a pretty rare thing to have somebody up. Okay, yeah. Audio straight. Audio good. So it's a pretty rare thing to have somebody in your own family to be part of this Federal Writers Project, okay, from 1936 to 1938. So they didn't even really do the project until really late. So the only people they can get, so slavery ended in 1960 or 1863, 1865, somewhere around that time. Slavery ended around that time, okay? And you're talking about 1936, so people would have to be in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Not even 60, probably 70. 70 would be, because that's almost 40 years, 36 years, 36 back, plus another 50, or 40. If you add 40 to that, that would be 76 years. So these people are going to be really elderly, okay? That they're going to be. So and the reason why I'm pointing that out is because you're going to be trying to get information from people who might have a little bit of a foggy memory. But either way, are they even true? Now, I also thought that it was funny. They say it's a folk history of the slavery in the United States from interviews from a former slave. Now, just for shits and giggles, I'm going to consult, because I believe I know what folk means, but I'm going to consult the etymon. You know what? I ain't going to do it on my phone like that. I'm going to do it with y'all. That's stupid. So we're going to consult the etymon dictionary. And we're just going to see for ourselves real quick, what does folk mean, okay? As a noun, folks, folk music, folk evening, noun. Okay. So folk history, it says Old English folk, common people, laity, men, people, nation, tribe, multitude, troop, army, and Proto-Germanic folka, further blah blah blah, Old Highland German, blah 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 blah, perhaps originally host of warriors, compare Old Norse folk people, also army detachment and Lithuania, whatever. Both believed to have been borrowed from Proto-Germanic. It would, what's the definition? Which would make it cognate to plethos and the popular to supersede most of the senses, generally a collective noun. Middle English, however, plural folks is attested from 15th century folklore. So let me just look at the normal dictionary real quick. Folk define. It says people in general relating to the traditional art and culture of a community or nation relating to folk music. Um, a group of forming a tribe or nation. So I'm not really, a folk history. I guess it just means a history uh, by the people is what I'm assuming. So either way, it doesn't really say it's fake. So it's supposed to be a true narrative account of people who were slaves at the time. Now let me show y'all on my tree where this person comes from and the conundrums that I have ran into on here. I hope my subscription is still going. Let's go to the trees. And we will be dealing with a particular line. I believe it's the Tate line. This would be the Tate line, okay? Coming off from Major Tate, Tom Tate. Those people started back in Georgia, Mississippi, then moved to Oklahoma. We got some Tennessees and Mississippi here, but we have here some Wambles. Wamble, Andy Wamble, Abraham Wamble, and Abraham Wamble, okay? Now, this is going back as far as, oops, I don't know why it's not pulling up for me. It's bullshitting. What is it? What's going on? Whole tree messed up. Okay. What's going on? It should be pulling up. Why does it keep doing that? Hold on, y'all. Okay, you see how that top part is there? This top part, the ancestry line or whatever, that was gone. And so it was like going to this full screen mode, and I don't know what's going on. But, okay, so here you have Abraham Wamble saying he goes back to 1776. Okay, now we're going to go and look at some of the hints for Mr. Abraham Wamble. And we have some hints on how we even identified possibly who he was. And when we go in here, you'll notice you have a, what is up, man? I'm swearing, I swear. You have a Wamble here listed. And there's a William, a Caroline, a Jane, a Mila or Millie, and a possible A Wamble. Wamble. Now we don't know 100% sure, but it says he's from North Carolina. Okay, says that he is 74 years old at the time. See that? So he's pretty old. 74 would put him being born in 1776. If this is him, okay? Now, we are going to go back to the tree, and we're going to look up under Abraham Wamble, his son, okay? Supposedly, and it should be. Listed here, we have some census records, but that's where I found the Federal Writers Project that we're going to take a look into. Okay, so in this, we have the project for Mr. Wamble. Now, I was still trying to tie them together. They were tied together by, must have been tied together by somebody else in the line or something. But as far as documents, I'm personally still trying to find the documents that tie them together, because Abraham is our main focus, but his dad's name was shown to be Abraham too. So this whole story is going to get a little crazy. This whole story is going to get crazy over time. So, but this is where I saw the records, okay? Let me show you the Federal Writers Project. And when you click on it, it'll show you, and we're going to go read it. I might be able to just read it from here, actually. So here's the actual thing, okay? It says he's from Gary, Indiana. It says Reverend Wimble. Okay, now keep that in mind. It says Reverend Wimble. It doesn't say Abraham Wimble, doesn't say Andy Wimble, or anybody first name Wimble. It just says Reverend Wimble, right? All right. So before we get to that, close out of that. I'm gonna kind of just give y'all a preview of where this story may go, or kind of takes a turn, because we're gonna be looking at things like this if you stay tuned. Because what does this have to do with the Wamble story? What a whole book. We even have a newspaper here from the archives. We're gonna get to those, talking about this Wamble, okay? But before we get into that, we're going to go back to the Federal Writers Project. We're going to read. I'm going to read this because I wanted to get this whole thing on one video. I did some videos about this on my TikTok, but I didn't get to do it. Let me see if I can put that in view for everybody on the TikTok world. I didn't get to do it for in a long format and read the entire thing, because there's lots of odd things to point out when reading these stories. Again, this is the Federal Writers Project. So when we'll pull that up. Federal Writers Project Slave Narratives. So it should pull up pretty easy. Okay. Now you see this over here. This is in the Library of Congress, right? This is the amount of slave narratives they have. A grand total of about this many, okay? Not very many. That's why I said that for me to have a family member listed within these. Now, are these certain volumes? Let's see. Hold on. Let me just make sure I'm not tripping. Okay, well, there's different volumes. But even in these volumes, it's not like it's a lot of people. So that's a certain amount of people in that volume, and so on and so forth. There's not a lot of people in these. Like, not like thousands and thousands of people were being interviewed for this project. And I'm saying that to say it's got to be a decently rare thing for me to have somebody in my tree that actually is in the project. And so they chose the right person to give it to, because I'm about to chop it up and figure out if everything they're saying is correct. Because in many cases, as we know, they lie and throw a lot of propaganda out there. So let's read through this document before I talk too much. Okay. So we're right here. It says Reverend Wamble was born a slave in Monroe County, Mississippi in 1859. Now, first things first, get the date. Slavery ended. I'm going to keep, let me not. 1865 is the actual date. For some reason, I kept thinking 1863. But no, 1865. Okay? So slavery ended 1865. He was born, goddamn, 1859. That means he was at max. This nigga was a 6-year-old slave. Okay? Now, is a goddamn 6-year-old really a slave? What does a 5-year-old do on the plantation or around the house? Aren't they just sucking up resources? Why even label them as a slave? Besides propagandist reasons, like the whole jab thing where we all, COVID, where that happened and they had the false negative numbers from the test to inflate the numbers. They needed to inflate the numbers of how many people were enslaved at the time. So a 6-year-old is labeled as a slave and marked down, and you believe it. And many of us will be like, well, he was, a slave at some point. He would have become a slave. No, because then you got to think. They are literally saying, hey, we are interviewing former slaves. What can a 70-something-year-old remember about being a 5-year-old slave? Quit playing with me, okay? Quit playing with me already in the document, okay? That's one thing I want you to realize. It's like they already starting off with the bull, okay? But a lot of people will just read that and just be like, oh, 1859, and he was a slave, and, and just go past the obvious that this nigga couldn't have been much of a slave. And then you're interviewing them, and they're going to be asking them deep questions about being a slave, okay? He's going to recall some very, let me turn this down some. He's going to recall some very outlandish type of situations from his days in slavery. But again, keep in mind as I go through this document that this nigga is under 6 years old this time, okay? Just keep that in mind. That's why you got to pay attention. Have discernment, okay? So let's go through here. So he was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1859, right? As a newborn slave, he jumped on the plantation right away, nigga. They slapped him on the back with the whip and got the cracking on the cotton. I'm just playing. I'm playing. Okay, let me get on to it. Okay, Raymond Wham was born in 1859. Okay, the Westbrook family, like Westbrook the basketball player, the Westbrook family owned many slaves in charge of overseers who managed the farm. So the Westbrook family owned slaves that were in charge of the overseers who managed the farm. That means they were slaves, but they managed the managers, because the overseers is supposed to be your whip cracker, right? But the slaves were in charge, as y'all see, in charge of the overseers who managed the farm, on which there were usually 200 or more slaves. They don't know how many, okay? They weren't out there counting or nothing. It's not like they had census records to go kind of figure this out. The Federal Writers Project, the government who's in charge of the census, who would have had access to the census records to actually see the exact number of slaves this nigga must have had, because it should have been on the slave schedules. But don't worry about none of that, you know what I'm saying? Also, don't ask questions on why Mr. Reverend Wamble, the slave, didn't take on the last name Westbrook from his slave owner. Don't ask questions about that either. See how I pick things apart easily? And you should too, okay? You should be able to pick this shit apart too. I'm already asking too many questions. And we ain't even got through the third goddamn sentence. So we got a 6-year-old slave who his parents was owned by the Westbrook family, and they didn't take on the Westbrook name like I guess they told us our last names come from. And then we have them being in charge of the overseers who manage the farm. Whatever. Okay, so let's keep going. Let me pull this up. Y'all see how the story is already off the chain. Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, and I forgot to say the last part. And they're not sure how many slaves he had. Just 100, 200, whatever. Okay? Something like that. Okay? What do you want us to do? Check the records? We're just the government. Okay? Anyway, let's go back. One of the Westbrook daughters married a Wamble wagon maker. So immediately As soon as these people get slaves, somebody marries one. What is up? What is this fascination for the BBC in old times, but only within a certain period? And why do I say that? Because typically what you're going to see in most people's trees, if you have any kind of white folks in your trees, what you typically are going to see is that shit being way back. Unless it's more recent, like you're a mulatto today, or your grandma, your mom was a mulatto. You're going to see it real recent then. But typically, most of y'all will see it way back, 1850 and prior, when the trickery is starting to happen purposely, usually in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And, but then after that, you won't see hardly no white folks in your tree, hardly at all, for quite some time. And then you got to wonder, so y'all just came over here, was BBC hungry, or Black Pooh 90 hungry to keep it, TikTok friendly. I got my TikTok folks here. I got my Twitter folks and my YouTube folks here. But y'all got real crazy and you just had to get you some of it. And then after that, all of y'all just went right back over and mixed in with the white tees. No, that's really a case of they took your identity and your names and all that other stuff. But let's keep going because they took our names, but they want us to believe that we got our names from them. They say, you see how they always just, like they don't really have good excuses. It's always just a flip it back on a nigga. But okay, let's go. Look, it's just so many things in this document that's questionable. It said one of the Westbrook daughters married a Wamble, a wagon maker. Now, Wamble, he was making wagons as a slave. I thought we was just picking cotton and shit. Now, I mean, many of us now know today we wasn't just picking cotton, but that's what they portrayed us as for most of the years. Some kind of agricultural on the plantation ass work, not making wagons, okay? But he was a wagon maker, okay? The Westbrook family gave the newlyweds 2 slaves. So, you can't even get past much without questioning everything. So the Wamble daughter got with a slave. They got married, and the parents of the Wamble daughter who owned the slaves that she married said, you know what, as a gift, let me give you a couple niggas. And the slave, who was just a slave, I don't know if he's free now because he got married, even though they wasn't recognizing marriages between slaves and white folks back then, but he got married, right? And then the gift given to them is 2 more slaves, and he was cool with that. Oh, man, I needed me a couple slaves. I've been out here slaving myself. Fuck out of here, okay? Get the fuck out of here. This is what they want you to believe. This is the story, okay? I hope y'all getting this. What's happening, TikTok fam? See if I got any trolls over here. Peace, real Indian G. Let's see if any trolls up in here. Lineage Business, what's happening? Appreciate the heart me's, Peters. Appreciate the gifts from all of y'all. All of y'all. Appreciate the people who joined. Appreciate the people who reposted. Kataba, what's happening? Everybody, what's happening? Okay. So, okay. Oh, you know what? Let me pull up my chat, because people from the YouTube world could be chatting a nigga up, Okay. So, yeah. All right. Oh, I forgot to change my title on my damn stream. Can I change it now? No, I don't think I can. I don't think I can. Too late. Whatever. I'll change it later. Okay. So, back to this story. This crazy enough story as it is. Let me give you a couple niggas for getting married to my nigga. Okay? All right, let's get back to it, okay? None of this makes sense. But this is the Federal Writers Project. It's official, okay? So, The Westbrook family gave them 2 slaves, as did the Wamble family. Huh? The Wamble family gave up some slaves? But the Wamble family was slaves. Let's go past because I don't want to get caught up. It's crazy, okay? One of the 2 slaves coming from the Westbrook family was Reverend Wamble's grandfather. So one of these slaves coming from the Westbrook family is Mr. Reverend Wamble's grandfather, whose last name was Wamble and not Westbrook. Go figure. And it says that it seems that the slaves took the name of their master, hence Reverend Wamble's grandfather was named Wamble. So I'm even more confused here, but I guess what they're trying to say is Reverend Wamble, his grandfather, they never explain. See, this is the problem. They never explained the Wamble family that fast. First, they start off with Reverend Wamble being born as a slave. Let's drill that into your head first, right? Then you get to talking about Westbrook family and how the Westbrook family owned many slaves in charge and managed those people, usually 200 slaves. One of the Westbrook's daughter married Mr. Wamble. Oh, okay. So that Wamble must not have been. Okay. I get what they're trying to say. So they're trying to say that this Wamble must have been the YT man Wamble. So I guess earlier me saying all that stuff about let me give you 2 niggas, it is what it is. But they're saying, hey, this is the YT guy. And it says the family of the Westbrook family gave them both some slaves. So a white Wamble and a white Westbrook got together, and both families gave some slaves to these white folks. And the white folk and Reverend Wamble supposedly took on the Wamble name. Okay, so I'm gonna take back all my so-called they took on the name, but that's if that's the case. I don't really show that in the records, but we'll have to see, because when I go back to the 1850 census, you see A. Wamble in here as a 74-year-old man, born in 1776, not on a slave schedule. Slave schedules was still going, I believe, in 1850, but I'm gonna have to double check. Double check that. We would have to see if there's some Wambles, and nobody connected any to them, but if there's some Wambles on the slave schedules of 1840 to really confirm that. But that doesn't take away the convolutedness of this story, because it still gets crazy. Remember, we're talking about Reverend Wamble, a 6-year-old so-called slave born in 1859. Now, another thing, too, to note, none of my Abraham Wambles from the documents of the censuses show to be born in 1859. In fact, the soonest one is Andy Wamble from 1846. So there's no 1859, it would be him, and then you have these Abrahams and Abrahams. All Wambles. That's not a coincidence, and somebody tied the slave narratives to Mr. Abraham Wamble here. So I don't know if it's this one, that one, and whatever. But we're going to go to the story. So it says, but we have at least an idea on where the Wamble came from. It says, it seems the slave took on the last name, hence Wamble's grandfather's last name was Wamble, the 6-year-old slave, right? It says, and think about that. Now that I think about that, you mean to tell me, because they're saying Reverend Wamble was one of the slaves given away to the family as newlyweds. So they gave the family a 6-year-old? Isn't that a burden? Well, no, I'm sorry. Not a 6-year-old, because after age 6, he was a goddamn free man. free kid, free baby, free toddler. So you gave your newlywed daughter. Look, I'm still look. I thought they had me for a second with my little wrong whatever, but no. I'm still evaluating your document. Wait a minute. You gave your newlywed daughters a slave who was between the ages of 2 to 5. What the hell good was that? What kind of sense does that make? You just gave them a burden. Shouldn't they be having their own kid as newlyweds? What the hell the 5-year-old gonna do for him? Fetch him some washcloths? It can't do that too well. He just learned to walk. What kind of sense does it make? That's why I say keep in mind Reverend Wamble was born a slave in 1859, but here Reverend Wamble's okay. My bad. My bad. I didn't plug my camera up. All right. Let me get my composure together, because this story kind of got me all over the place. So I kind of got that. So Reverend Wamble's grandfather was a slave, so he wouldn't have been a 4, 5, 6 year old slave. I was going crazy. Reverend Wamble's grandfather was a slave, but this is why it gets kind of crazy because, not tricky, confusing, as I'm confused as reading, because I'll go ahead and just spill the beans on this now. I was gonna wait until later, but they never say first names in this document. Never. There's Reverend Wamble, Reverend Wamble's grandfather, Reverend Wamble's mom, Reverend Wamble's grandmother, Reverend Wamble's wife, and his 3 children, and it's like, what the hell is their names? And the reason why, that's why I was getting confused just a second ago. But I was getting confused also trying to tie them to my tree. But let's keep going. It says families owning only a few slaves. Whoops, let me put this on there on the main screen. Families owning only a few slaves in moderate circumstances usually treated their slaves kindly, since they, like a farmer with only a few horses, it was to their best interest to see their slaves were well provided for. Now, this is just them saying it, because obviously if they're interviewing Reverend Wamble, the 1859 born slave, he can't remember this. Okay, but anyways, they said the slaves was well provided for and well cared for, right? That sounds like YT, explanations. Why won't this get off my screen? Golly. The slaves were valuable, and there were no funds to buy others, whereas large slave owners were wealthy and one slave more or less made little difference. The Reverend's father, so this is where it gets tricky, because they was talking about his grandfather being owned. Now they're going to and you see how they say the Reverend's father? They never say names. But anyways, the Reverend's father and his 3 brothers. So the father and 3 brothers would be the sons of Mr. Abraham, or the original Reverend, or the original Wamble, who we don't know whose name. That's why I'm saying it's confusing, because if I'm trying to tie them back to this Abraham Wamble on my tree from 1776, I need some kind of name, some documents, some years. but they're just saying his grandfather and then his whatever. So, but even if I look at the oldest grandfather, was him in 1774 years of age. He was born in 1776, and he does not have three boys listed under him. He has Millie, he has Jane, he has Caroline, and he has William. Okay? So it could be a different one, right? Maybe they got it wrong pointing to this Wamble, but apparently they said that the Reverend's father and his three brothers were children of the original African slaves and were the same age as the Wamble boys and grew up together. So it's a little confusing. The Wamble boys they must be talking about must be the white Wamble boys, because now they're referring to some random Wamble boys. But these people, which are Reverend, who's Reverend Wamble, his dad, which would have been apparently Wamble because they took on the name, right? And his three brothers were supposedly children of the original Africans, which means his grandfather would have been an African, right? Which means this guy, if correct, supposedly is supposed to be an African. We don't. That's if this is the same person, even though the children don't even match up. Okay, and we don't even know if the name is right because these niggas never use names. So I could be like, oh, his grandfather Abraham Wamble, oh, his dad Andy Wamble. I'm still not sure, but and just remember this. This is the Federal Writers Project. They got access to records from the government. First names aren't hard to figure out. So the fact that no first name was on here tripped up all kind of red flags at some point. Now, I didn't realize it until a little bit later in the document, but it was just like, nigga, what the fuck is that? What's up with all these names? Now, I'm going to show you later when we come back to this document. Not back, but when we get to this, why the hell it may be. But let's keep going with the story first. The slaves were very, blah, blah, blah. I went through that, and the boys grew up together. The Reverend's grandfather was manager of the farm, and the three Wamble boys worked under the same as the slaves. The Reverend's grandfather was manager, so Reverend Wamble's granddad was the manager of the farm, and the three Wamble boys, I guess the three boys, because it's hard to tell because they just said that they was the same age as the Wamble boys was the same age as some Wamble boys, and they grew up together. It's all over the place, but okay. And the Wamble boys worked under him as the same as the slaves. So it says, Mr. Wamble never permitted any of his slaves to be whipped, nor were they mistreated. His slaves? It's the Westbrook slaves. Well, no, it's Mr. Wamble. See, there it goes again. Because they don't use first names, now they're talking about Mr. Wamble, the YT person, never permitted it. But Mr. Reverend, because right here is the Reverend's father, but Reverend who? Reverend Wamble. Okay? His father would be a Wamble. And it's just confusing, right? Okay. So Mr. Wamble, the YT man, never allowed these people to be mistreated. Now it says Mr. Westbrook was a deacon in the Methodist Church and had two slave overseers to manage the farm and the slaves. He was very severe with his slaves. So Mr. Westbrook was severe with his slaves, but I guess Mr. Wamble wasn't. So severe with his slaves, and none of them were permitted to leave the farm. If they did leave the farm and were found outside, they were arrested and whipped. Okay? Now, where are they getting this information from? Because again, This is supposed to be an interview of a slave. So far, it's just been story time. So far, it's just been story time of the Federal Writers Project government nigga. Okay? Mr. Wham was blah blah blah, and he had a this, and his grandfather worked as a that, and Mr. Wimble never hit the slave, but Mr. Westbrook had hit all his slaves severely, and the nigga, a 5-year-old can't tell you all of this, can't remember all that. A 5-year-old ain't even gonna remember that nigga Westbrook. Okay, these people are crazy, crazy, and not only that, he's the 5-year-old grandson. That means they're talking about his grandfather and his father. That means he would have had to remember these stories. Whatever, man. Whatever. Okay. The Westbrook was mortified, and one of the overseers would come and take the slaves home where he would again be whipped. The slave was tied to a cedar tree or post and lashed with a snake whip. How does he know what the fuck is? Who's telling him this stuff? Who told him that somebody would? This is how Westbrook treats his slave. He tied him up. A 5-year-old, remember this, from his grandfathers and them. You know, and don't get me wrong, some people can tell us the stories and pass down stories and families and shit like that, but this is a little crazy. This is a lot crazy. Okay? Let me just check my Twitter. See how my Twitter's going real quick. 45 people on the Twitter. Appreciate y'all. Let me just see what the YouTube's hitting at. It ain't never much. One. So, on with the discussion. So, with a snake whip. So, Reverend Wimble, let's continue. Reverend Wimble's mother, notice they did that? Reverend Wimble's mother, okay, not a first name at all, was a Westbrook, even though somebody put Deerbrook, okay? Was a Deerbrook Westbrook slave, okay? They don't know, just go with it. Okay? Slave when the Reverend was 2 years of age. His mother died from a miscarriage causing by a whipping. They're really, really whip happy in this document. You're going to notice that. So they was just talking about some people getting whipped, and now they're like, Westbrook's mother got whipped so hard she miscarried. Okay. All right. When the women slaves were in an advanced stage of pregnancy, they were made to lie face down on a specially dug depression in the ground and were whipped. Do y'all get what they're saying? They're saying that, and I don't know where they got this, because obviously they're interviewing a 6-year-old. He was 6 at the time. 70-something-year-old man, but he was 6 at the time. They're saying that because she has a belly and she needed to be whipped, she couldn't just stand up and get whipped, so they dug a hole in the ground where her stomach can fit inside. And she lie down on the ground, flat, so that they may be whipped. This is literally what the story is saying they did to pregnant women. Is it that serious that you? I need you to lay down. I can't whip you standing and all that. I need good aiming. Okay. This shit is, when I said this document, this is the federal writers, this document made no sense on top of the 6-year-old slave, on top of the never saying first names and all this other shit, man. But let's keep going, because it's a hell of a document. So they were lied down, specifically dug in the ground and were whipped. Otherwise, they were treated like men. Their arms were tied around a cedar tree or a post, and they were lashed. Okay? I just want y'all to know they keep talking about shit. They gonna let you know, nigga, there's some lashes coming that happened. Now, this nigga that we interviewing, he may not remember him, but we're gonna tell you about him, okay? Since the Reverend appeared to be a promising slave, both the Westbrooks and the Wambles wanted him, much like one would want a valuable colt today. Okay, they wanted him like they wanted a horse. Okay, since the Reverend's grandmother was a Westbrook, don't say her name or the mother's name, or the grandfather's name, or the father's name, or his brother's name. Just go with it. The Reverend grandmother was a Westbrook, and the Wambles treated the slaves much better. So here's the convoluted story again. So the Reverend's grandmother was a Westbrook who married the Wamble slave. She was a Westbrook slave who married the Reverend Wamble's grandfather, who was a slave under the Wambles, and they got okay. Since the Reverend's grandmother was a Westbrook, they treated their slave better. She, and it says right here, she hid the child in a shed, what would probably be a poor doghouse today, and fed the child during the nighttime. So she hid her 1-year-old and 2-year-old child in a shed and only fed them at the nighttime. Something like a doghouse. Something like a poor doghouse. This is what it ain't that we believe these stories. It's just that we say, hey, they got slave narratives out there. That's how you know it's real. And they just go with it. These niggas just write anything. They know they need the stories. So just write some story for me, nigga. Just write some stories. Yeah, just write some stories. It ain't gotta matter or make sense. But okay, let's go. So she kept Mr. Wamble, one of these Wambles, goddamn it. I don't know if it's Reverend Wamble or Reverend Wamble's dad. One of them. Because it said it was the grandmother. It must have been the son. I don't know, man. It says so she kept him in a doghouse. Okay. During this period of his life, Reverend remembers what happened. So it's the Reverend they're talking about who was kept in the doghouse. It says during this period of his life, between 0 to 6. The Reverend remembers what happened to one of the Westbrook slaves who had ran away. One evening, as he was no longer in the poor doghouse, he came to the Wamble's home and asked for some supper. As a 5-year-old and 6-year-old? All right. Wamble took the slave into his home and after feeding him, placed the log cabin which was hanging above the fireplace around the slave's waist, left him to sleep on a bench in front of the fireplace. The next morning, after the slave was given breakfast by the Wambles, Westbrook, his son, and the overseer appeared. Reverend Wamble, in his hideout, remembers being awakened by the sound of the slave being, you know what happened. He's being whipped, okay? You know they needed to add another whipping story. They already had 3 of them. We need 4, 5, 7, 8 more, okay? So yes, okay? He woke up to the sound of somebody being whipped, and he remembered it at age 5, 6, okay? And the moaning of the slave. Whoosh, oh, whoosh, oh. What's that? I'm 5-year-old. What's that? Fuck out of here, man. These people are fucking crazy. After the whipping, it's like they were infatuated with writing down the word whip. You know what I'm saying? After the whipping, the slave was turned loose. After he had gone loose gone about a mile through the bottom land toward the river, Westbrook turned his hounds loose on the slave tracks. The hounds treed the slave before he had gone another mile, much like a dog would tree a cat. Oh, treed him. The hounds treed the slave. I guess they all tree y'all. They got the Birdman motherfucking lingo going on. He treed him. I guess that means he went up a tree. I didn't realize it said much like a dog would tree a cat. This is the educated Federal Writers Project government worker saying a nigga got treed, okay? Somebody said Django over here on the motherfucking TikTok. These people are crazy. This is why they don't want you to read this shit, because you would figure out it's a bunch of bullshit. But let's keep going. The Westbrooks pulled the slave down from the tree, and the dogs slashed his foot. Slashed. Okay. The slave was then whipped. Now he just got whipped, right? And then they let him go and sook the hounds on him. He got treed by the hounds. Whatever, treed. The best way they can explain it as Federal Writers Project niggas. And then they went up there, pulled him down out the tree and whipped him some more, okay? This was remembered by the 5-year-old, mind you. So let's bring the story back to a head. The 5-year-old or 4 or 3, anything under 6, was awakened by a person being whipped. He remembers the dude moaning and I guess being run away. Now the dude didn't get a mile down the way before the hounds was sicked on him, and I guess the niggas, the Westbrook family, took the 5-year-old along with them. Okay. And as they took the 5-year-old along with them in hand, who was also their slave, right? They chased down this other slave who was treed by the dogs. And they pulled him down, and they set the 5-year-old down, and he witnessed him being whipped some more. Oh my God. This is in the Library of Congress, okay? The Westbrook slave was then whipped, whatever, okay. He was driven back to the Wamble's place with whips where he had been whipped. He was driven back with whips where he had been whipped from the whip. Appreciate the breakdown from him being whipped. I forgot he was whipped. Okay, I needed more descriptions so I can remember how whipped he was whipped. Okay. Oh, they drove him down 2 miles, the Westbrook place where he was whipped some more. And then he got whipped some more when they got back to the spot, y'all. Whatever became of the slave, whether he died or recovered, nobody knows. They whipped him to death. Why'd you bring him home to whip him to death? Why did he just whip him to death right out there by the tree he treed up? Okay? That was his son running from the family business. Your ass is wild tonight. This document is wild from the goddamn Library of Congress. This is why I've been meaning to read this for a while to people, because this shit makes absolutely no sense. Okay, but let's get through it, cause it's something to get through. Okay, I'm out of breath. I ain't even gonna lie, I'm tripping. Okay, it says, let me move this over so y'all can see me just a little bit in TikTok world. Okay, It says, whatever became of the slave, nobody knows. Okay. One unusual feature of this story is that the Westbrook who permitted his slaves to be whipped, you should take a shot every time I say the word whip. But it says, was a church deacon, whereas Wimble, who never attended church, never whipped or mistreated his slaves. Well, good for him. Says, the Reverend states that in the community where he resided, the slaves were well treated except for the whippings they received. We ain't gonna quit telling you about these whippings, okay? They were well fed and whipped. Not just playing. They were well fed, and if injured during the whippings or sick, were attended by a doctor on the same principle that a person would care for an injured horse or sick cow. They were not human beings, they were cows or horses, okay, according to these folks. The slaves were valuable cows or horses who were whipped. I don't know if they whipped the cows or horses, but they damn sure want you to know they whipped the Wambles, okay? And it was the best interest of the owner to see that they were able to work. In case of slaves having children, the children became the property of the mother's owner. If the South had won the war, Wamble would have been a Westbrook. Since his mother was a Westbrook slave, and if it lost, he would go live with his father and take the name of his father, a Wamble slave. I mean, wouldn't he take his father either way because that's his fucking father? Fuck the mom's name and what she got her name from. Whatever. So until the war was over, he was hid out, much like a small child would bring a stray dog home. These people are fucking nuts. He hid him like a dog. How many times y'all gonna keep liking us to a dog, a cow, a horse? Much like what y'all are. You know, those things have hair on their bodies similar to theirs. They get lice just like them. But we're compared to it. Anyway, a stray dog and hide it somewhere for fear that if the parents discovered it, it would be taken away. The living quarters of the slaves were made of logs covered with mud, and the roof was covered with coarse boards upon which dirt about a foot in depth was placed. So think about this. This is the 5-year-old slave telling them this. The 5-year-old remembers it was about a foot in depth of mud that was layering the shed. He has depth perception of a mathematical genius, okay? Goddamn super mathematical depth perception genius in a 5-year-old. And he understands construction very well. Primitive construction at that. The furniture consisted of a small stove, and the beds were 2 boards extending from 2 walls. The extending end resting on a peg driven into the ground. The 5-year-old knew it was driven into the ground. He remembers this, okay? Vividly. This would make a one-legged bed. They just want you to know, they just talking shit. Yeah, they had a one-legged bed, nigga, that was connected to the wall. Okay. The 2 boards were covered across ways with more boards, and the slaves slept on these boards or upon the dirt floors. There were, get off the screen with the blue shit. There were no blankets provided for them. For food, the slaves received plenty of meat, potatoes, and whatever could be raised. If the master had plenty to eat, so did the slaves. But if food was not plentiful for the master, the slaves had less to eat. Only one of the three Wamble boys joined the Southern Army. Until the war was over, the other two boys who refused to go to war hid out in the surrounding woods and hills. The only time the Reverend's father left the farm was to attend to his master Billy when he was in a hospital recovering from wounds received in battle. Just random shit. Wamble was a wagon maker. We knew that. Apparently, right? He made 2 or 3 wagons, which usually, hold up, y'all, I gotta do this on my Twitter. On my TikTok. He made 2 or 3 wagons, which usually took about 6 months. Then he hitched teams to them and went north to Missouri, Kansas, and Arkansas, and kept going until he had sold the wagons and teams, keeping one wagon and team with which to return home. This must be what all he remembers. Sometimes the master would be gone for a period of 9 to 12 months. During his absence, the Reverend's grandfather was in charge of the farm. The grandmother of Reverend Wamble, no names, was a full-blooded African Negro. The grandmother of Reverend Wamble was a full-blooded African Negro. Okay? If you want to believe it, if you believe anything up to this point, then you can believe that. Okay? Brought to this country as a slave at 17 years of age. Well, they should know some slave language. They should have plenty. Somebody thanking me. They should have plenty of slave language, African language left over, right? But that's never the case. Never the case with these folks. Let me go to the next page, and it's not going for whatever reason. Let me refresh. Next page. Oops, now it wants to go fast. At 17 years of age, she came over from Africa, guys. Believe it if you want. Now, somebody would take this document and be like, see, it's in the Library of Congress saying that they was African slaves. Zero discernment. Them people have zero discernment, and you should never trust them whatsoever. But, okay. She was a very large and strong woman and was often hired out to do man's work. Slaves were forbidden to have papers in their possession, and since they were forbidden to read papers, hardly any slaves could read or write. Excuse me. Never was any occasion or need to do these things. It was not known that the Reverend's grandmother could read and write until after the Civil War. The Reverend remembers, at 5 years old or less, remembers his grandmother bringing an old newspaper to his hideout during the Civil War late at night after the Wamble family had retired, and making a candle from fried meat grease and a cord string, which made a very tiny light. She placed some old blankets over the walls so that no light could be seen through the cracks of the hut. She would then place the paper as near as possible to the light without burning it and read the paper. It was never discovered where or how she learned to read and write. So you want to tell me this 5-year-old remembers his grandmother lighting a candle made of meat grease and a cord string, and the light of the candle was so low she had to put the paper very close to even read, but she still took the time to cover up all the windows with blankets so this tiny ass light, which you can't even read the fuck off of, is not going to be shown through that motherfucking window. Uh, and nobody taught her how to read, but she read, and she's reading the newspapers. Okay. And African slaves were brought here at age 17 and didn't remember no motherfucking African languages too. Uh, if a young, good-looking husky Negro was trustworthy, the family would make him the driver of the family carriage. They would dress him in the best clothes obtainable and with the silk finished beaver skin hat. The driver sat on a seat on the top and towards the front of the carriage. He was compelled to stay on this seat when waiting for any of the family that he might be driving, regardless of whether or the length of the time had to wait. The mail was carried in the same kind of vehicle with Negro drivers. In each town was a certain rack at which this mail carriage would stop in each village or wherever the designated stop made. Now, this 5-year-old remembers this now. He remembers the mail and designated mail carriers, all that shit. Upon hearing the rack and coming to a stop, the driver would blow a bugle call, which would be heard for miles around, and people hearing this bugle would come and get their mail. Because the 5-year-old remembers that. The Reverend remembers that several of the drivers froze to death during the cold winter. You remember that at 5 and 6, okay. And that the winter, many times the horses on the mail carriages, upon coming to the rack, would stop and the driver would be sitting frozen to death in the seat. So somebody took the 5-year-old kid out there to go look at the frozen, unalived mail carrier on the horse. Yeah, that makes sense. Men would, and it was a Negro. Remember, the mail carriers were Negro. Now, they just needed another story to say to kill off some more niggas in it, okay? Y'all been whipped enough. Now we freezing you to death, okay? These people are insane, okay? Men would take him down, carefully saving the silk hat for some other driver. They took the frozen Negro mail carrier down in front of the 5-year-old child and saved the hat made of silk. And gave it to another nigga. Yeah, here's the hat that a nigga froze to death on. Hopefully it gives you good luck, like it gave him, right? Okay. The politicians would always tell the Negroes what was good for them and making it appear that it was for their best interest and they should vote for him. Always giving the dessert first and making them think that they were on the level no matter what the meal might be or what hardships they were causing the Negro to suffer. On one instance, after the Negroes were forbidden to vote, they marched in a body to the polls and demanded the Democrats' ballot and were then permitted to vote. Reverend Wamble was 27 years of age before he saw and read his first newspaper. He lived with the Wamble for 20 years after the war, when his father, then in partnership with another man, purchased 40 acres of land. He attended his first school and for a period of 2 months only in 1871. That means he was free. What is he doing staying with these folks in 1871, But anyway, in 1872, the government built a school on his father's farm, and it was taught by the missionary. The school term was about 3 months out of the year. The Reverend attended the school for 7 years. In 1880, he married the first time. His first wife, unalived, in Memphis, Tennessee, by the marriage. There was fourth children. The Reverend survived. It's blah 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 pretty much from this point. Let me just make sure. Yeah, this is the last page right here. The Reverend, second wife, coke plant, somebody working at the coke plant, small pensions, modern times. Okay. So let me plug my MacBook in before it dies on me. Hold on, y'all. Let me give me a bite of this food. I'm sorry. All right. So for those who stuck around, whoops, we know that this story is a bunch of bullshit. Right? For those of y'all that stuck around, we've come up with many good reasons why this story is bullshit. They don't use nobody's first names. They talk about whipping. They have like a obsession with it. It's like they dream about whipping at night. Okay? Random people keep getting unalive. You got a 5-year-old person that they're interviewing, and he remembered all of this and recited it all. You know, there were some African slaves that came over here at age 17, but nobody remembers an African language. So many random things about this document. They don't remember ages. They don't have these people's ages. None of this shit. Okay? Well, let's move towards other things. Now, why do I got that up? What the hell does the Ku Klux Klan gotta do with the Wambles? Well, let's start off with this newspaper article that I found. Okay, the Duquan or whatever Tribune. In here, you have a Mr. Abraham Wamble listed. What year is this? 1871. Around the time that one of them was supposedly going to school, right, for the first time. I ain't gonna believe that shit. I ain't believing none of that shit. But anyways, Abraham Wamble was a colored preacher taken out by 50 or 60 masked men and shot. Mr. Marshall, a bitter Democrat on whose place Wamble lived, states that he did not know a more quiet and well-disposed man in the neighborhood, but he voted the radical ticket. We have an Abraham Wamble getting taken out and shot. Let's see what it says in this book. Three months later, let me make sure the paragraph, I don't think the paragraph before that mentioned it. No, it didn't. We're going to be reading this paragraph here. 3 months later, in the same neighborhood, a mob of 50 or 60 Klansmen took the Reverend Wamble, Abraham Wamble, from his home and shot him 7 times for voting the radical ticket. Even before that spate of homicides in August 1869, Governor Adelbert Ames had warned General John Sherman that Mississippi's rising murder rate did not represent usual events of ordinary times. Rather, Ames wrote, the slayings were Ku Klux outrages mainly based on political enmity and hatred. The war still exists in very important phase here. So here you got an Abraham Wamble being killed in about 1871. Now, is that the same Reverend Wamble who's talking to these people in the year 1936? It typically had a year on here. In the year, this is a 19. I think it's 1936. I gotta go to the first page of. Oh, here it is. From the years 1936 to 38, or it like which Reverend Wamble would they be referring to? Again, let me show you. We have proof, excuse me, proof that there's an Abraham Wamble who was a colored preacher. Right? But then you have a Abraham Wamble who was a colored slave born in 1859 who died about 1871, which means he would have been 12 years old. The only way this makes sense is if Reverend Wamble, his grandson, also became a reverend. That would be the only way it would make sense. But did we read anywhere about Reverend Wamble becoming a reverend based off of his grandfather? It never said. Maybe they're talking about it was his grandfather that was unalive, but that shouldn't be the case because we do still have a Reverend Wamble being counted in 1850 in the census. Well, I guess 1850 is not that late because they said 71, so 1850. But 1871 would have put that nigga about, he's 74 right here, would have put the nigga about 96 years old. If he made it that far. Let me see if I have a date on his unalivement real quick. Nope, there's no date listed for his there's no date listed for his death. But if it was in a newspaper, shouldn't it easily be listed right here? Unless this, coincidentally, a whole nother Abraham Wamble we don't know nothing about. And it can't be this Abraham Wamble, because this Abraham Wamble, which was the son of the other Abraham Wamble, born in 1805, I guess it could be him being unalive, but it doesn't say that he was a reverend. Nobody says anything about being a reverend until you get to the grandson, Mr. Reverend Wamble. And he wasn't a reverend during the time of being the grandson. You know, when he was smaller, younger. Nigga didn't even really supposedly write and read English until later. Supposedly. I'm not believing any of that story in the Federal Writers Project. Hell no. Okay? But this is what they want us to believe. These stories right here. Just because they wrote a slave narrative and put it in the Library of Congress does not make any of it true. Whatsoever. Whatsoever. Let me check my Twitter world. Twitter world sitting at 64. We got 14 on the TikTok world. Appreciate that. So yeah, I'm about to get off of here, but this is what we're dealing with. Fake stories drawn up under the possible name of somebody who was killed by one of these same folks playing games, writing up this fake story. It's like they needed some names for this project, and somebody thought it was funny to bring up a Wamble. Unless they're not tied together, and somebody can find other Wambles out there that ties these folks to this, it would be hard. There's no first names even in the document. None. These people be playing games, writing stories, fake stories to get you to believe things. And that's not hard to believe. That's what they do on the news and other stuff today. It's propaganda all the time. And we have to have better discernment when we start going through these things instead of just blindly listening to whatever. So that's my live stream for the night for y'all. Appreciate y'all coming up in here. Appreciate you getting this game. And I hope y'all enjoy the rest of y'all evening. Okay? And yeah, don't let these people play with you. Have more discernment when you